Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final 1531 lecture of 21 T1. Nice to see we have 15 people here, which is exciting. I mean, that means that there's 15 people who either are submitted their project or they've given up on their project. I'm sure there's hopefully more in the first category. So yeah, nice to see everyone. Today's lecture is relatively straightforward, which is to talk about the exam. And there's actually not a lot to it, because the slides here are just linking to the WebCMS3 page, which will, oh god, that's the wrong one. How did I link to the wrong one? Did I click on the wrong slide? I must have linked to the wrong slide. Oh no, okay. I think I updated that link. I'll have to fix that up, I'm sorry. It links to this page, or it will link to that page by the time you're watching this recording, because 98% of you will be watching the recording. Or it's in the sidebar on WebCMS3. I don't even need a slide deck for this. So I just want to quickly talk through this, and people can ask questions and stuff. So we'll just really step through it. So first thing, sitting the exam. Yeah, it is. So during the duration of the exam, you must have access to a stable internet connection for pushing to GitLab and receiving emails, right? So the majority of what you're doing is like using VLab and using GitLab or receiving emails. Now, if you don't have a stable internet connection at home, you have a few options here. One is you can try and use hotspot or data for your exam if you'd like to. The second one is that you can go to another place like a library or a friend's house or something. But here's the important thing. Bad internet will not be grounds for special consideration. This isn't because I don't like you. This is because it's too challenging to figure that out. It's too challenging to to know whether someone's just saying that or not saying that. It's a really difficult area. So if you don't feel like your internet at home is stable, then go somewhere else for the exam. That being said, your initial thought's going to be like, oh my god, what if my internet goes down? Like, it's gone down before, it goes down every month or something. In the case where your internet completely craps itself, you can apply for special consideration, because in situations where your internet craps itself, you can nearly always email your internet service provider and ask them to confirm that it's down. This usually happens once a term. A student emails me and say, my internet's gone down, nothing's working. And I say, stop the exam, apply for special consideration, and they usually email or they live chat Telstra or whoever their internet provider is, and they're usually like, yep, we can confirm we've had outages in your area at this time. And that's enough to get special consideration. So don't worry about your internet just collapsing. That's fine. It's more like if your internet's just kind of like a little slow and a little patchy, but it's not quite like effed enough to basically get confirmation from your ISP that it's down, then go somewhere else for the exam, or go to uni or something like this. By sitting the exam, you're declaring you're fit to do so and cannot later apply for special consideration. This is for pre-existing issues. And I might even say that. Or no, I don't need to say that, because technically this is just a summary of UNSW's fit to sit policy. Basically what this means is that if during the exam something happens, like you develop a migraine and have to go to hospital, right? Or your internet collapses, like things that go wrong after the exam starts that were not predictable, that's totally fine. We deal with that because that's fairness, right? But the fit to sit policy at UNSW essentially says that if you have the flu, if you wake up on the exam day with the flu and then you start the exam, and then halfway through the exam, you're like, oh, I feel too sick. And you're like, sorry, here's a doctor's certificate from yesterday saying that I've had the flu. That won't count at all. That's not applicable. You know what I mean? So if you go into the exam knowing you're unwell or something will impact you, you should not sit it and instead apply for special consideration to do this up. So I hope that makes sense. If you do feel unwell during the exam, or you have an internet issue, this is more like if you have an issue that disables you from completing the exam, stop working on the exam, take a note of the time. You can usually do this just by emailing me. Email me, CS1531, and advise me that I'm unwell, that you're unwell, not that I'm unwell. That would be funny. Go and submit it special consideration. In reality, I think you have like 3 days to submit it. But I mean, like, when it's like submit it immediately if like you can. But I know in some cases you might be in hospital, or you might have to get rushed off to the doctor and submit it that evening, etc. So yeah, it's pretty much just like get in contact and get relevant documentation is what that's about here. In terms of your exam, date, time, and duration, the final exam will be a 4-hour exam from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Wednesday, the 5th of May. It's an afternoon exam so that everyone in the Asia Pacific region can sit the exam. Yeah, exactly. So what that means is if you're in India, if you're in China, if you're in any Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, I mean, I don't need to list all the countries in Southeast Asia. If you're any, I could use my map for the first time. If you're anywhere in this area here, then you sit the exam at the normal time. And if you're anywhere outside of that, if you're in Europe or the USA, then email me, because we might have to configure things differently. Because obviously if you're in Europe, that that would be like 5 a.m. to start. And if you're in the US, that would be like literally midnight or around then, not 10 p.m. So I think particularly for the US, that's probably a bigger problem. Anyway, if you're in Europe or the US, which I don't think a ton of you are this term, just email me and we'll sort that out. If you have ELS requirements, like extensions and stuff, like by extensions, I mean like if you have like extra time or you have some certain disabilities that you get compensation for, then you will get an email from me sometime basically confirming that. You don't need to do anything at all. I have a list, it's all done. I just have to get around at some point to like emailing you and confirming like you start at 1, you finish at 8, stuff like that. But it's all on Wednesday the 5th of May. If we do have to change your exam time, it's probably not going to be earlier too. Okay, exam structure. So the exam's going to be worth 100 marks. That doesn't really mean anything. It's just a number we picked. It could be worth 50. It could be worth 70, whatever. These 100 marks will make up 30% of the course because the exam's worth 30%. Pretty logical. Now the exam's kind of broken up into 2 sections. The first section is a set of short answer questions, typically like 2 to 3 marks each, 1 to 3 marks. It's going to be like 15 to 25 marks. We're still writing the exam, so the final thing comes, it's a little bit variable, but this might be like 23 marks or something, but it's like, it's about a quarter or just under a quarter is asking you to write answers to things. Now, in a perfect world, I'd actually love that to be 100%, because I think the point of this course is not to teach you how to program. I think the point of this course is to teach you how to think, and I would love to get you how to think. Few reasons that we don't have that as 100%. Number one, UNSW tries probably to avoid spending a ton of money on marking, and marking short answer questions are surely expensive. It's a lot of humans reading a lot of things, right? We asked you 7 short answer questions. There's 700 of you. That's 5,000 responses that need to be read and graded, right? And that's only when there's like 7. So marking costs are a problem. The second problem, which is an equity problem, is that reality is UNSW does let in a reasonable number of people that don't speak very fluent English, right? Which is a struggle. That's not a bad thing. I don't dislike anyone that doesn't speak fluent English, but it does create a problem whereby if we ask short answer questions, we're kind of half punishing those who don't speak fluent English, because it is a communication exercise. And we do think communication is important. We want to assess you on your ability to do communication, but because we're aware that there are some quite dramatic English standard levels, we don't want to mark on that divide heavily, because that would be a bit unfair, because I know there's people out there who understand what we're saying and what we're doing and what the course is about, but they don't have great written communication skills. That can also be applied to like locals and native speakers who just don't have great communication skills. So we just don't want this to be a massive distinguishing factor. You don't have to draw any diagrams in this, and most of it will be like the tutorial questions or lab questions that are more fluffy, like the requirements.txt and the use cases and stuff like that. Majority of the marks are programming questions. Oh, the other problem with short answer, sorry. The third thing is it's an open book exam, which I think we get to at some point. But short answers are really hard in open book exams because all the answers are on the internet. So we can't ask you questions like, what are the 6 thingies of the software development lifecycle? Because you're just like, I'm going to go look that up. And then all that means is we can only ask you really hard questions. Like if you remember high school, things like justify questions and stuff, and that puts even more pressure on written communication. So it's a bit tricky. So the majority of the marks though are programming. So pretty much tut and lab questions, little snippets of things. There might be a bigger one to do with HTTP testing, or HTTP questions, whether it's testing or writing Flask. But a lot of it will be like, GitLab. A lot of it will be lab 9 deploy. Let's find a random lab. I feel like this is all the repos on GitLab, by the way. I feel like most of GitLab's just my courses. No one likes GitLab. They should. It's great. I wish more courses use GitLab. Like, we go through so much effort to teach you Git in this course, and if you actually get Git infrastructure up well, it's a really incredible way to like distribute, release things to give students they can version control their own stuff. Tutors can access your code anytime. And what's great is 1531's a core course, so like I've been telling people, you can literally just make everyone anyway, I'm talking about nothing. Here you go. This would be like an exam question, right? Like, complete a function that prints as many of these as the user passes into the function. Simple exam question. Probably not something like this. The problem again with the exam being open book is like we can't ask something so simple that you can just Google it, but they're not going to be like ridiculously hard. Perhaps says, why does UNSW not use GitHub and use GitLab again? 2 reasons, I believe. I didn't set it up originally. I'm not like the GitLab expert. But number 1 is like GitLab can be hosted on CSE servers. So CSE basically actually maintains control of your code. Like your code is actually sitting in K17, the cse.unsw.edu.au. So naturally, because it's educational content, they like having it on site. I think that's probably less of an issue these days because like everything is moving more cloud-based. Like your emails are sitting on Microsoft servers, not on campus. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff like that too, right? Like UNSW used to host their own email till like 5 years ago or something. Anywho, and the second thing was I think the problem we had with GitHub was that they all have APIs, right? So when we do things like push your new repos and update your code and push solutions, we're using the GitLab API, and because we're hosting it internally, there's no API limits on it. We can call it as many times as we want, basically, because it's like our server. Whereas like with GitHub, I think the course actually used to be on GitHub a long time ago. But the problem was that it worked well, but then there was like so GitHub apps making server-to-server requests use the installation's minimum rate limit of 5,000 requests per hour. So like for instance, when we push your labs every week, we probably make like 4,200 requests just in the creating, probably like tens of thousands of requests. So there was, basically, we'd have to have a license with GitHub, which we could probably get, but like, that's not in my job description to negotiate with GitHub. Because we're educational, I'm sure there'd be something they do, but I don't think the normal server-to-server rate limits would work. This is much higher than what it was before, much, much, much higher. But I reckon we'd run into problems, mainly because we use it in like massive hits. Like every time we make your repo, we have to like create a branch and do this and do that and do that. So there's probably like 5 requests per repo, and if there's 6 repos, that's 4,200 by 5. That's like 20,000 requests in half an hour. Anywho, we will expect you to use PyTest and coverage in the exam, a lot like lab questions, and we'll award marks for that. We'll provide details of this on a per question basis, so it will be very clear instructions. You are welcome to use Pylint, but we will not award marks for Pylint. Okay, so why is that? I think that time-based exams, like where we ask you to code under pressure, my attitude towards them has changed over the years. I used to think they were stupid because like no one in reality has to like code in a closed exam environment, right? Where they like have to get something done in 3 hours. But then as I kind of got a bit older, I realized that it's actually pretty common to have to solve problems quickly in the workplace. And I don't mean like perfectly, but like on a daily basis, I'll be working with people who are like, no, we have this problem and we need to find a solution by the end of the day. And it won't be perfect and all of that, but it needs to happen, right? So like learning how to program under a little bit of time pressure, particularly in open book environments, which is very indicative of reality, is a good thing. But because of that, we don't want to assess you on things like Pylint because no reasonable person would expect someone to write code quickly and cleanly, right? It's like a bit mean. That's kind of a bit too much to ask from someone. So we're not going to do any Pylinting in the exam at all. And we'll give you the requirements.txt file so that you can use all of the standard ones in the course. There's no hurdle for the exam. A number of you will have passed the exam prior to the exam. I will put your grades up. I will put a grade up in your system sometime between now and the exam, which is basically like marks needed to pass, where I'll give you like a mark out of 30 to basically say this is the minimum you need to score in the exam to pass the course. For a reasonable number of you, that will be 0 out of 30, as in like you don't need to score anything in the exam to pass the course. So there will be people that could literally skip the exam and pass the course fine. Not that most high achievers would want to do that, but it's a very low stress exam in the scheme of things. That's my hope. I don't want you stressed out in exam period because you've probably been stressed out enough this term. Programming questions will have basic sample input output. They'll contain a basic PyTest for you to sanity check your work, blah, blah, blah. This is all pretty standard. Okay, completing your exam. So the exam will be distributed via GitLab, and it'll be very similar to a single lab repo in that we basically deploy a repo to your computer, to your GitLab, and then you can clone it, work on it, and push to it. So very similar to all of that. There's nothing going to be fancy about it or anything. The exam must be completed locally or via VLab. I'm not really sure why it says must be. I don't know where else you're going to complete it. Like, you're not going to complete it in the fridge or something. I don't know. But wherever you complete your exam, you must ensure you push your work you want submitted to GitLab master branch and ensure that it works on VLab. This ensure that it works on VLab is more a disclaimer for me because it's not so much that like most of you working on this locally won't have problems when we run it ourselves. However, some of you will, because some of you have weird setups. Some of you have some other things. So I would say that just do a sanity check on the CSE environment. When we say VLab environment, we just say that for simplicity, but that means SSHing in, that means VS Code live server, that means VLab or anything like that. So yeah. So just to visualize it for you again, for the exam, you have to use GitLab. It's a CSE service where your stuff's hosted. You can choose to then either clone that locally or on VLab CSE. Both of those options are fine. But the point is that whether you clone it to VLab locally or on a goddamn potato, you're still pushing it to GitLab. That's still where we're marking it. The only thing you need to make sure of is that your code is on GitLab at the end. Hell, you could literally click on your code and modify it on GitLab if you wanted to not do very well. But that would be fine as long as it's on GitLab, because we will just clone your repos at the end of the exam. So at the end of the exam, we take you out of your own repo, we remove you as a member, and then we mark your stuff after that fact. You will need to use an API client like ARC, and the requirements are in these files. We've talked about requirements. They're all you need for the questions we ask. If you're thinking, oh, what I need to install is not in this list, take a big step back and ask yourself if you're approaching this question the right way, because you're probably not, because there's plenty in here. There'll be no GitLab pipelines or runners that are running your code when we push to GitLab. We'll provide instructions on how to run them locally. Remember that the pipelines are just local commands. Pylint, pytest, pycoverage. You don't have to run pylint, by the way. You can if you'd like. So there's no pipelines, but again, pipelines are just what you run locally. So yeah. When we mark your stuff, will we be using the latest Python? No, we'll be using the Python that I'll be using the Python, whatever Python 3 is on the CSE machines. If you're not sure, you can always just SSH into a CSE machine like this. And then if you just type in Python 3 version, it's 3.7.3. That's the version of Python we mark everyone's stuff against. Be very careful if you're working locally, because some of you have versions of Python that are 3.8, and I distinctively I distinctively remember in 20T3 we had some students have some of their questions fail in the exam because they were using a different version of Python. Is there a way to degrade Python locally? I don't know off the top of my head. I know there is. There's a bunch of instructions online. I would just Google like if you work on Windows, I just Google like Windows downgrade Python, or Mac something. Often you can install it alongside it so that when you work with Python, you actually just like type in like Python 3.7 or something. And then like, which is how it kind of works here. So there's like Python 3.7, and then on CSE there's like more versions. So if your default's Python 3.9, 3.8, at the very least you should be able to just like install Python 3.7 and then call it manually. But also, if you haven't had issues with your project, there's a good chance you're not going to have issues with the exam. But you know, it's definitely worth checking. Technical issues related to your local environment are not grounds for special consideration. Yeah. So basically, if there's a massive VLab problem, particularly VLab, right? Maybe I'll make this clearer here. It's only VLab and CSE SSH that are grounds for special consideration. As in, if you try and connect to CSE and you can't, and there's a CSE problem, or you try and connect to VLab and you can't because there's a CSE problem, then we'll give you leniency. If your computer, if the version of if you're getting random errors on your computer while you're trying to pip3 install stuff, like your local computer, that's not grounds for it. Like you kind of can't be like, something, my local computer, because like we can't debug it, and we didn't ask you to use your local computer, right? Like you're kind of always doing that under your own prerogative, so just keep that in mind. Okay, nearly there. Communication help during the exam. This is an open book exam, meaning you are able to use the internet and other resources to their full extent. The one exception to this is that you are prohibited from seeking help from other students during the exam. Any form of communication after you or another person has started the exam will result in a 0 mark for the course. Don't email anyone, don't Facebook anyone, don't Instagram anyone, don't UNSW Dreams anyone, don't do anything. Don't WhatsApp anyone. In my experience, usually we have a way of finding out just because people talk. And that's not good. So don't do it. We also run plagiarism detection on all your exams. So if you do copy someone's code, we will find you. I guarantee you of that. It happens every term. I give people 0 every term for copying people's code. So don't do it. We'll give you a Python cheat sheet and Python docs included in your repo. Not that it matters because you have open book. That's kind of for the days when we didn't have open book. If you have questions during the exam, you don't email me. You don't email CS1531. The only time you do that is if like you need to apply for special consideration or something crazy like that. All of your questions should be posted on the forum as a private post. Nearly everyone here knows how to do that. You go into ed. you go to new thread, you go post or question, whatever. I'll add. It doesn't really matter for the exam because no one's going to be posting a fun topic during the exam. You click private, you make your post, we answer it there. Pretty simple. So you make a private post during the exam. Don't message me on Teams. Don't call me on Teams. Don't send me an email because I'll be ignoring it because I'll just be looking at the forum. If you can post a question, because we can actually answer that. Post we can't really answer technically. Like it kind of comes up really weird. So, yep. When posting a message to the forum, it's important that you're detailed with your issue. So it's like, make sure your code's up to date on GitLab. Show screenshots of your issue. Explain how you produced it and whether you're running it locally or in VLab. I can't stress this enough. If you write bad questions, like, it's roughly going to take us on average, let's say 15 minutes to get to your question, right? What's this random recording thing here? Sorry, I'm just reading this random little recording icon on my computer, just freaking me out. I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, so make it detailed, because the worst thing that can happen is that you ask a crappy question and then it takes me 15 minutes to get to it, and then what I get to it is I say, can you ask a better question? And then you have to wait another 15 minutes. So take the time to actually properly articulate yourself to tell us, this is my issue, this is how we produced it, right? We can't help you in an online exam. Sometimes there's this thing I've noticed where with the move to online exams, people think that they can ask any kinds of questions. But like, you are in an exam environment. Like you're also young, you probably haven't, you know what it's like HSC exams and stuff, right? It's like, if you wouldn't put your hand up and ask one of those old people, like, hey, do you know what the answer to this question is? Or like, I can't get this answer out and I'm not sure why. And they're going to look at you and be like, cool, good luck. Like, we're going to do a very similar thing. So if you kind of like, hey, my code's not working and I don't know why, we're just going to be like, okay, if you show us more screenshots, we can probably just say, this is your fault, not ours. Good luck. Don't ask that question unless you actually think it's not your fault, by the way, because that's just wasting everyone's time, including yours. But also tell us whether you're running it locally or in VLab, because that kind of makes a difference. Because sometimes, like, and in general, if you run into weird system problems locally, I'd recommend you go on VLab anyway and just try and check it out there. Clarifications made during the exam will be made at the top of the spec. After each clarification, an email will be sent to all students in the course notifying them that the clarification has been made, which we'll talk about in a sec. Submission. The exam will operate like other assessments in the course. At the end of your exam, we'll be taking the most recent push to the master branch of your exam repository as your exam submission. So same as the lab, same as the project, we will just take your master. That's all it is. Sarth says, will the VLab be slow during the exam? Should we work on a local computer? I like working on VLab because I don't like surprises. Like, I don't like weird things. I like the certainty of knowing it's on the environment that it's being marked in. Will VLab be slow? I don't know. Like, there's so many CSE students that are using VLab all the time right now, right? Like, a lot of people are using it right now from all these different courses. During exam period, it's a lot less in some ways. I don't think I've ever really had extended problems with VLab's performance. I know some people are like, oh, it's slow, blah, 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 but generally I find it okay during exams. The issue we've had in the past is that GitLab sometimes crashes because everyone tries to refresh. And I'll just say this to everyone 100 times over. If for some reason there is an issue with GitLab during the exam, it's because you all clicked on the GitLab link at the same time. Now, I can't control this, and I ask people above me every time, please make GitLab more durable so that it can handle a base load of users. And I'm sure they fixed that problem, but if that happens, if for some reason GitLab gets overloaded, just stop mashing the refresh button. Because it's the worst thing that happens is everyone's like, oh, GitLab's down, refresh, and then like GitLab is literally like, you've like kicked GitLab onto the floor, and then it's like you're just strangling it at this point. So I know asking you to like just refresh every 30 seconds at the start of the exam's fine, and I'm hoping it won't come to that, so it should be fine. Just don't panic. If it's down for you, it's down for everyone, and the quicker we can get it back up, the easier it is for everyone. And I don't think it'll happen because it's been a problem every time, but just in case. So, okay, so preparation. How do you prepare for the exam? Well, to be honest with you, tutes and lab questions are actually the best way to prepare for the course, because we write the tutes and labs we write the tute and lab questions like we're writing exam questions, and vice versa. So, if you want more practice, then go to those. Sarth says, can I clone the same repo on VLab and local computer? Yeah, absolutely. You can clone one on VLab, clone one on your local computer. In some ways, to be honest, I would probably maybe do some work locally and like just git push it to master super frequently, like just crappy commit messages all the time. And then every like half an hour when I finish a question, I just go into VLab, git pull, PyTest coverage, just make sure it works. Good sanity check. There's a few older exam questions you can find here. These are some multiple choice ones back when we had a multiple choice exam. So, and this was, I think, closed book. This was a different exam. But these are some simple questions you can practice on too. Our exam will not have multiple choice, but they're good questions that make you think nonetheless. Most importantly, a simplified exam paper can be found here. So if you click on this link at the bottom, you'll get exam spec sample. Now, exam spec sample looks exactly the same as the final exam in the sense that it's like, here's the overview. There's a change log up here. Here's how to clone your repository. And then we have the short answer and the extended answers. And the short answers look like this. It's like, question 1. Answer this question in q1.txt. Describe and justify 3 attributes of good requirements. Question 2. Do the same thing, right? Like, it's just lots of different questions. And then we have the programming questions, which in this sample exam is 80%. And we have a question here, and a question here, and a question here, and a question here. And we haven't filled out 12, 13, or 14 because like we already have enough questions in the tutes and labs. The point of the sample exam is to give you a sense of the structure. So, same with these ones here. We're just trying to give you a sense of the structure because you have enough material to study generally. Submission is pushed to master. Don't plagiarize. That's the crux of it. The most important thing about the exam is to understand that we have pushed this spec to a common repo that everyone has. You do not clone this repo. It is shared with everyone. Notice how it doesn't have students/your Z number in the URL. It's everyone's repo. Don't clone it and push to it, okay? What we also do is we provide you with your personal exam repo. Now, this won't work for me because I don't have an exam repo deployed to my computer, but I can show you what it looks like because this will work for you. Is we deploy a repo just like your labs that looks like this. And it literally just says the specification for the exam is here. I need to update that. I'm sorry, that's the wrong link. And then it has like question1.txt, which is blank, and then the Python questions. So again, just to clarify, we have our spec exam, our spec repo, which is for everyone, one repo. And then we go and like deploy a whole bunch of exam repos like this. And this one's for like Z whatever, this one's for like Z whatever, this one's for like Z whatever. So you're all working on these ones, and you're reading the one spec repo. The spec repo is like the tutorials, it's like the lecture code, it's just one repo. Now, why do I do this? The answer is pretty simple. If there are clarifications we need to make in the exam, I can push them to the spec immediately and everyone gets them. If I was to push them to your personal repos, GitLab would spend about 12 minutes having to deploy all of these changes, and they'd all come up in merge requests, and it would be like a nightmare, right? Like, some of you would miss the merge request, some of you would get it 10 minutes before others. It's a nightmare. So what happens in the exam is that I never update your repo at all. We only ever update this repo, and every time I update the changelog with something, or a clarification, I send everyone in the course an email that's like, hey, update, we've had to clarify this question. Yep. That's actually it. That's the whole exam. Now let's go through questions about it, and when we get through questions, we'll wrap up for today. How good is the sample exam? I don't know if that's a question, because part of me just hears like every time part of me just hears Scott Morrison every time someone says how good. Like, how good is the sample exam? So is it good enough to practice that? So the sample exam is there to give you a sense of the structure, and the questions in the sample exam are good, but the point is that you already have all the tutes and lab questions to practice, particularly like a lot of the programming lab questions. So really you're going to spend most of your time revising the labs and making sure you're across them and everything like that. The sample exam is just for structure, even though half of it's filled in with actual questions you can practice as well. If I was using the CSE server on local, as in VS Live code, generally speaking, any issues with Python compatibility only happen when you install Python locally. If you're using VLab or SSHing through a terminal or using VS Live code, you are connecting to CSE machines in various ways. So yeah, they're all fine. They're all different. Praf says, so wait, during the exam, we can refer to our labs and projects. So again, it's an open book exam. You do this exam assuming that everyone on the planet is dead and that you can't talk to them, but the internet is still fully functional in every way, shape, and form. Everyone's dead except me. I'm not dead. It's just you and me. And whoever else might help on the forum, I don't know. Yeah, you can refer to anything. Yeah. In general, with the exam, the problem with open book exams, again, is that they will feel a little bit easier. Sorry, they're a lot easier because you can look up any resource you want. Because of that, the exam's not going to feel easy. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, be scared or whatever. But if the exam's so easy again that you can all do it, it's a pointless assessment activity. So in general, what I hope is that the average student in this course finds the exam a little bit hard and very challenging to finish, right? Not very challenging to do much of. You can do a lot of it, but like very challenging to like do it all. Like you kind of feel like you don't have enough time. But that's the nature of it, right? Because like we need to make sure that the best students kind of just finish it perfectly, right? And then the good students either just finish it okay, or they do a lot of it very well, right? Like we need this like scale of stuff. Now I scale the exams anyway, right? If they're too low. So I just want to stress that as well. It's like, so if we make the exam too hard, we bring everyone's marks up. Now we don't want to make the exam so hard, because if the exam's so hard, then literally people can't answer questions, and that's not the intent. And some of the questions we ask will depend a little bit on the final project marks. That's a reality as well. No, I don't want to say that the sample exam is... So that's a good question. Praf says, so compared to the sample exam, the exam is a lot easier or harder. I don't think the exam will be much harder. Like, I'm not trying to leave you with the sense that like this is easy and the exam's going to be really hard. It's more that the final exam will probably feel like a lot to do, right? It'll feel like a lot to do in 4 hours. By the way, why do I give you 4 hours? It's a couple of reasons. One is any longer, and I think it's too tiring. I think that 4-hour exams at home are a lot easier than 3-hour exams in a lab, so I don't really feel like it's a ton of time, because you could listen to music, you can take a break, go to the toilet, grab something from the kitchen, you can look out the window. Like it's a lot less like intense than a 3-hour exam on campus. You know what I mean? So I don't think 4 hours is too bad, but I also like 4 hours because A, it gives you more time, and B, it just gives us a bit more breathing room if something goes wrong for 3 minutes. Because like, if you're like, if you have like a VLab issue for 2 or 3 minutes, if you have a whole extra hour in the exam, that 2 or 3 minute issue kind of dissolves a little bit more, you know, than like a 3-hour exam when kind of every minute matters, kind of thing. That's why it's a 4-hour exam. Yeah, you can copy little code snippets from the internet if you cite them. That's fine. Just make sure they're not like literally all the code, because otherwise the plagiarism detector will probably find it, because it'll find other students using it. Like there's a good chance if you find a snippet of code, someone else will as well. But yeah, so probably the only thing that's not really obvious in the sample exam is that typically the last bigger question of the programming exam will be a Flask question. So a lot of the programming questions will be non-Flask questions. They'll be just like a lot of your labs, like solve this problem. Whereas like the last question will kind of be like write a tiny little Flask server, test that little Flask server. It'll be like a little tiny bit of a project. So when I say a bit of a project, I mean like in the course, you kind of have a lot of non-Flasky stuff in the labs and then a lot of Flasky stuff in the project. So being comfortable with that works. The other reason we like to test this, there's no deployment in the exam. So the other reason we like to do some Flask stuff in the exam, I think originally, this was Rob made a good point, where I was like, I don't want to do Flask stuff in the exam because I feel like all we've done all term is like Flask. But one really helpful thing about Flask in the exam is there are students in this course who have, I shit you not, who have literally like either bribed through like monetary means their friends to do their project for them and tell them that they contributed, or there are people out there who just get a free ride because they're in a group with nice people who don't like to complain. So another point of the exam is to make sure that if you literally didn't do any work this term, or you got your friends to commit for you, that you basically can't escape your lack of learning, right? Like if you never learned how to write a single HTTP test, if you never wrote any code with the requests library, then there's going to be parts of the exam that will really hurt, right? If you don't study for it and all that stuff. So there's a little bit of Flask stuff. What's with the site? I don't care about the site. Like there's no example. It's just like it's kind of a pointless thing because I'm not going to ask you a question that you can copy and paste from the internet. So you could probably take whatever snippets you want. It probably doesn't matter. Okay, honestly, like the questions are going to be sufficiently small, and I won't ask you questions. Like I'm not going to be like generate the Fibonacci sequence because you'll just Google that, right? I'm not going to ask you that question. It's just free marks. So short answer, just copy and paste snippets if you need them. You won't be able to copy and paste an entire question. So I'm sure it's fine. You probably don't even need to cite them. So I wouldn't stress too much about it. You're all very logical too. So I believe in you. So yeah, remember in the exam, to be comfortable with a what would you call it? ARC client or some kind of API client. No Python encoding. The exam, like we're not going to look at your source code for programming questions. Actually, this leads to a great question that always comes up. So here's the thing. In the exam, I'll tell you the number one reason people lose marks, right? And I saw this a lot in T3. People write source code, they write tests for it, they do that for every question, and then they get a mark in the exam of like 30%, right? And then they go, I get emails, and they're like, why? I did everything fine. And they submit a request to review, and we review their code and all this shit. And it turns out that, like, classic case, right? It's the same as your project. You wrote code, you wrote tests, your code passed your test, but all your tests are wrong. Like, you've misunderstood the question. You haven't even, like, read the question properly. You haven't read the behavior properly or something like that, right? So my advice to you all is be dubious of passing your PyTest, right? Like, passing your own PyTest doesn't really mean anything. It's like, okay, sure. But, like, are you writing the right PyTest? Because don't let yourself... don't let yourself get caught up in like that whole my test passed, so everything's fine. Because it's like, no, because we're going to run our tests against it. Like your project will give you some marks. Like you get a little mark for coverage, you get a little mark for your PyTest, passing your PyTest, and then most of your mark will come from the auto marking. And this will be written in the questions as well, and it might vary per question in the exam. But generally speaking, it's like, you know, does your code work? Did you write tests that pass your code? And does your code work? It's a bigger chunk of it. So we do auto mark it. We don't look at your code. There is going to be like literally thousands and thousands of Python files for us to auto mark. So now I get the standard question, which is like, what happens if my code is like most of the way there, but it doesn't work, right? Like what happens if it's pretty good, but I just didn't get it? So because the exam is auto marked, the short answer is if your code doesn't work, you don't get the marks. It's as simple as that. We don't, and that's also why we try and ask smaller questions, because like, I don't want to ask you a giant question that you just fundamentally get wrong, right? That's why the exam's made up of smaller questions. So if you really ruin one of them, it's just like a little nick compared to like a big hit. So what was I saying? My brain just shut down. That's not helpful. Exam questions, nick, one issue, PyTest auto marking something. So when we auto mark, if you don't pass the auto marks, that's going to be the end of it, right? Like, okay, you don't get the marks. Now that's kind of normal for, you know, a lot of auto marking in exams, because like it's just not feasible to like manually mark everyone. That being said, and I want to stress this big one, the times we do manually review code are when students do very badly, right? And I want to stress this to you because there's two reasons people worry. One reason is they say, what if my code works, what if my code nearly works, but the auto marker fails it? And I'm a really high achieving student who wants to get like I want to go from 85 to 100 in the exam. And then there's a second type of person that's like, I'm really scared about failing, and what if like I write what if I write nearly good code, but none of it works, and then I fail the course because all my code was really close but it didn't work. So to that first group of people that are like, I'm going to do well in the exam, but what happens if I get a 90 instead of 100 or something? You know, like I do really well, but I could do better if I just tweaked a few things. Like the sad answer I have to give you is like, well, get it right? Like do it properly. That's the point of the exam. Some of you will do it very well and get really high marks, and some of you will do quite well because you made some mistakes that probably could have been fixed by a couple of tweaks, right? And it's like, that kind of person is pretty minimal, but it's just like, you're in the upper end. Like, we're not going to manually review everyone's code, so like, if you get like a 85 or something high in the exam and you say, and you say like, I think I could have done better if I just make some tweaks. It's like, well, that was the exam. Like, you can't make tweaks. Like, otherwise, it's a Pandora's box where, like, hundreds of students can make hundreds of... You get it. So, that being said, we don't want anyone to fail the course based on a technicality. So, if your project and lab mark is, like, 38 out of 100, and then you do the exam, and in the exam you get, like... Well, let's say you fail the course... either you get 0 in the exam or like 5 out of 100 in the exam, or you like fail the course and your exam mark's really low, right? In those cases, we will naturally go through your code, because if it's just like literally 1 or 2 things, then like we don't want to fail you because you had an extra line in your code, right? Like there's a difference between like high achievers and then like people literally having to get held back a course because of a technicality. So the olive branch I'm throwing to you all is go into the exam knowing that you might lose some marks because you just didn't do it properly, right? Like you got it wrong, right? Like you got it wrong, and then you'll do badly because you got it wrong in like 1 or 2 questions. But have confidence that we will not fail students because of some technicalities. So if you do like all the questions and like most of them are like really good and they just like a couple of problems that are breaking all of them, like we will definitely not fail you. We'll adjust you in that case, because failing is very different. Like we don't want people to fail. Like we don't want people to fail on a technicality. That's about it. That's kind of my general promise to you, is I wouldn't let a student fail that I think has done all the right things and just tripped up on a couple of things. So Patrick says I need partial marks. So it's not like in an exam question we give like 0 or 1 or something. Like we have marks for, like we give you marks for coverage, we give you marks for PyTest, and we give you marks for auto marking. So if you're passing your own PyTests, you'll probably get a mark for that. Yeah, like as in like there'll be marks carved out for that. I'm just gonna have a look at something. Give me a sec. We're gonna wrap up soon, so we won't take a break. We'll just wrap up soon. I'm just reading what I wrote in one of the questions last year, which is you will receive 50% of your marks in this question. So this question was worth like 5 marks for our auto marking, and then like 25% for branch coverage. So in some of these questions, for instance, like we ask you to some of them we check your PyTest, some of them we check your coverage, some of them like we auto mark more. Like it kind of will vary per question, but in general, you kind of go into this knowing that I will need to write PyTests for my stuff, and those PyTests might get marked. I will need to write PyTests for my stuff, and those PyTests might have their coverage checked, and I need to write correct code, right? Like it needs to work based on the course auto markers. Again, it's not going to be a hard exam. We're not trying to crush people or anything like that. The only thing I'll say is that because the questions will be relatively doable, right? Because we're not asking you extremely difficult questions, we will have to ask a fair few questions. I've been told this is an Andrew Taylor style of examining, which I still don't quite know what that means, but we will aim for most of you not to be able to finish everything, right? We want most people to be able to do most of the exam. So don't feel deflated if like you get a lot of the exam out comfortably and then you don't finish every single question, or you don't finish every single question perfectly. That's part of the exam. That's part of examination in general. Yeah, so Praf, I guess what I'm getting at is like, I would imagine that more people will come out of the exam and think, wow, that was a lot to do in 4 hours, rather than thinking, wow, that was like, I had no idea how to even start any of that. Like, it'll just feel like, and I'm just guessing here because we're still writing the exam, right? But it's just more likely that it's just going to feel long rather than hard, because I don't like asking hard questions, because if you ask really hard questions, then you basically separate students into those that get it and those that don't, right? Like, because if it's really hard, then like a lot of students just like are like, I have no idea. I don't know how to start. Sorry, I'm out. And I don't like that. So I'd rather give people like small chunks of sneak peek. I'd rather give people small chunks of things that they can like tackle in bite-sized pieces, because generally speaking, the more capable you are in Python, the more competent you are, the more able you are to solve problems, the quicker you'll solve problems, right? Because you won't have to look up as many pieces of documentation. You won't make as many mistakes. You know how to debug your code quicker, and that's what will bring you to like be able to do more questions. So I wouldn't be worried about the exam. Like in the sense that, like I don't feel like anyone should be panicked about it. Most of you are finished. Most of you'll be able to do a reasonable chunk of the exam. There's a bunch of short answer there that nearly any of you can do. And there'll be a bunch of Python questions that you'll find fine. And it's just a question for a lot of you as to whether you can answer a chunk of the exam or like all the exam. Yeah. It's not like ungodly hard. It's not like we're like, oh, here's 100 questions. It's just like, we just don't want you all to finish it. That's as simple as it is. We're not like, let's make it long. We're just like, let's make sure that like a really average student doesn't just breeze through this thing and say, all done, everything's perfect. Because then you all get the same mark. And I know you think, oh, wow, that's great marks. But no, that's not good. Because then there's someone in the course who like worked a lot less hard than you who'll get the same mark as you. And that's not what we want. We want to reward people for their efforts. Okay, any other questions about the exam? I'll wrap up in 5 minutes, so if you have any questions, ask them now. Just post them all on the chat. Don't just like wait for 4 minutes till I answer another question and then ask yours. So I just post every question you have in the next minute. Yay, photo upload. That's exciting. If the highest mark was an 80, will everyone's mark be scaled so that the highest is 100? Generally, yeah. Like, yeah, we do some scaling of marks. I never scale. You pretty much never scale down. It's an ethically tricky area. But like for instance, last term we didn't scale up. We scaled up at the upper end a little bit because there was like yeah, and we scaled up a tiny bit. But last year the project marks were so high, and nearly everyone got full marks in the class mark. So we didn't really have room to scale people up in the exam because like even though the exam effectively distributed people, like we didn't have room to increase everyone's mark because otherwise everyone would have gotten a distinction. Is there a double pass for this course? No. Any course who has a double pass for an open book exam, I don't understand what that's about. Because the only reason we have hurdles in exams are literally to say that you're in the exam room now where we know you can't cheat. Whereas with open book exams, if you've been cheating all term, you can just cheat now in the exam. Like nothing's going to stop you cheating. So there's no point like putting a hurdle there. Do you know what I mean? Like that the whole point of a hurdle is that we can control that you're not cheating in this exam. So if you don't pass the exam, it's because you probably cheated, right? You cheated the whole course and you did the exam and you got 10 out of 100 even though your assessment marks are 90. So you probably don't deserve that mark or something, right? That's the general principle. So double passes for open book exams make zero sense to me. What's the best thing to practice for the exams? The practice exam, labs and shoots. If you've done the project, then you're well on the way. I generally like to have a policy in my course where if you've done the work throughout the course, you've already studied. And you can just revise things you've already studied, right? So if you've done the labs and you've been in the tutes and you've understood the tute questions and you've participated in the project, you're like pretty much ready for the exam. The only thing you should really do before the exam is just like maybe go over some of those questions again. Just get comfortable with Python, and you know, so you feel like you're more able to do it. So for a lot of you, I would honestly just like 3 or 4 days before the exam, just try and answer a bunch of old lab questions again till you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm in the headspace again, where like I'm comfortable writing Python. Cool, that's cool, Claude. Okay, last calls for questions. It's all good, thanks, Sarth. I know a bunch of you are gonna have to try and submit your projects, so Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap it up then. I have to check some things with projects as well. So, thanks for a great term, everyone. You'll still hear from me, but this might be the last time that we chat on. Well, I chat at you, I guess. But thanks for being great. As I say this before, it's an open secret that I love teaching 1531 because I think it's a great course, and it's not always easy, but it's certainly good to see people grow. And think about the fact that literally 10 weeks ago, none of you knew Git, or 9 weeks and 1 day ago, none of you knew Git. Well, not none of you. A lot of you didn't know Git. A lot of you didn't know Python. A lot of you weren't really like thinking about projects or working in teams. So it's really awesome to see that, and yeah. So, and thanks for being awesome. I know I say this before, Paul. Paul, how do you feel about the exam? Sure. I say this before, but like courses are easy to run if you have good and motivated and understanding students. So the best part about my job is when you make my life easy by, just like listening and being understanding, and when we explain why we do what we do, you try and take it on board, and sometimes we give you answers you don't like, and you try and listen to what we're saying, and so yeah, thank you for that. 10 weeks ago you didn't know Hayden, better times. Yeah. And if you need anything else, like I'll be on the forum between now and the exam, and you have an early exam for this course and should be fine. So sure, I'll see you all at other points at other times, no doubt. So anyway, thank you everyone. Hope you have a good day. Good luck for your final project submissions. And I'll leave you with the standby screen for a couple minutes. All right, see you everyone.